Out of the shared interests of people on the internet, none are more fascinating and widespread than shipwrecks. No matter what ship it was or what the story is, it always seems like people will gravitate towards it. We all know the classics: the Titanic, Britannic, Lusitania, Olympic, and many more. Although it seems like the interest died down after we all became adults, it never left me, which brought me to a story of a certain ship. Out of all of the shipwrecks that I know of, this one is the most chilling to me. Allow me to tell you about it. On a cold November night in 1975, a Great Lakes freighter left Superior, Wisconsin, headed for Detroit, Michigan. 29 men, including the captain and his crew, all perished on this journey. No one knows exactly what happened to them. No one really knows how the ship sank. This is the story of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. On June 7, 1958, 15,000 people gathered in River Road, Michigan for the christening and the launch of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. The lake freighter, which spanned 729 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 39 feet deep, was at the time the largest ship on the North American Great Lakes. Owned by the Northwestern Mutual Life Company, based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the ship was ordered on February 1st, 1957, and was named after the then Northwestern Mutual chairman, Edmund Fitzgerald. Like I said earlier, the ship was massive and could hold a total of 26,000 long tons. The ship would continue to be the biggest Great Lakes freighter until 1959, when the SS Murray Bay was constructed. The Fitzgerald's main purpose was to move taconite from the Minnesota Iron Range to ironworks in Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, and many more. The Edmund Fitzgerald's work would earn her several nicknames, including Fitz, the Toledo Express, and my personal favorite, Big Fitz. And those nicknames would stand true for the next 18 years until one night in November would change all of that. On the afternoon of November 9th, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald was loaded up with 26,116 long tons of taconite and was headed to Zug Island. With Captain Ernest M. McSorley and 28 crew members, the ship left Superior, Wisconsin at 2:15 p.m. The ship would be joined by the SS Arthur M. Anderson and the SS Wilfred Sykes. The National Weather Service had predicted that a storm would pass south of Lake Superior at 7 a.m. the next day, on November 10th. However, the captain of the Wilfred Sykes, Captain Dudley J. Paquette, suggested that the storm that was predicted to pass south of the lake was actually going to pass directly over the lake in the path of the three ships. Captain Paquette, in a wise move, decided to take a route that was more north of the lake to avoid the major dangers of the storm. However, the captain and the crew would continue to listen into radio conversations between the Arthur Anderson and the Edmund Fitzgerald. It was also around this time that the NWS had begun issuing gale warnings for the entirety of Lake Superior. The two ships decided to take refuge along the Ontario shore. However, the Arthur Anderson had slowed down their speed, but the Edmund Fitzgerald continued full steam ahead into the storm. At around 2 a.m. on November 10th, the NWS upgraded their gale warnings to storm warnings, forecasting wind speeds of up to 35 to 50 knots. 1 hour later, the Fitzgerald passed the Anderson, marking this the first time that the ship had done so in the voyage. As it began to snow, the Anderson lost visual sight of the Fitzgerald, but was able to communicate to them through radio. Around 3:30 p.m., Captain McSorley radioed that the ship had begun taking on water and had sustained physical damage in the form of two lost vent covers and a fence railing. The ship slowed down to allow the Anderson to close the gap, which had now grown to around 16 miles, and that the Fitzgerald was having radar issues. It was also around this time that the ship had begun to list on the starboard side. The Anderson began guiding the Fitzgerald to Whitefish Bay, which at the time did not have a functioning radio beacon, but did have a lighthouse. Captain McSorley then claimed that he had lost both radars, meaning that the Fitzgerald had no way of navigating itself and had to rely on the Arthur Anderson and the nearby Avafors. By the afternoon, the wind speeds had crept up to 50 knots with waves as high as 25 feet. At approximately 7:10 p.m., the Arthur Anderson contacted the Fitzgerald once more and asked how they were doing, to which Captain McSorley replied, "We are holding our own." 10 minutes later, at 7:20 p.m., the Anderson had lost all communication with the Fitzgerald. Captain Bernie Cooper was first to radio the United States Coast Guard to notify them that the Edmund Fitzgerald was in trouble. At around 7:39 p.m., Cooper radioed in, but was turned away as to keep the distress line open. Cooper then attempted several more times until 7:54, when Officer Philip Branch told him to keep watch for a 16-foot boat that had been lost in the area. At 8:25, Cooper contacted the Coast Guard once again to express concern for the Fitzgerald, and finally, the ship was reported missing at 9:03 p.m. Since the Coast Guard lacked the suitable search and rescue equipment, they radioed to the Anderson and the nearby SS William Clay Ford to search for survivors, although the search turned up nothing but debris, lifeboats, and rafts. None of the 29 crew members were found. 4 days after the Fitzgerald went missing, the U.S. Navy used their Lockheed P-3 Orion aircraft to attempt to locate the ship. With its ability to detect magnetic anomalies, a signal was picked up. On May 20th, 1976, the U.S. Navy conducted a survey using an unmanned submersible named Curve 3, diving near where the anomaly was detected. There, lying 530 feet deep at the bottom of Lake Superior, was the wreck of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. The ship had been broken into two, with its bow section lying upright and the stern side lying capsized at a 50-degree angle from the bow. Scattered wreckage and large pellets of taconite were also found near the site. 4 years later, Jean-Michel Costal would conduct the first manned dive to the wreckage, sending 2 divers down. Although the pair were unable to draw conclusions, they speculated that the ship had broken up above water. And so began the mystery of how the Fitzgerald went under. As the years ticked on with the ship under the water, the leading cause of the ship's sinking has remained shrouded in mystery. Several possible theories emerged to explain the sinking of the vessel. One of these theories had to pertain to the harsh weather conditions on the voyage. In 2005, the NOAA and NWS launched a simulation of what the conditions would have looked like on that fateful night. The analysis showed 2 different points where winds exceeded 40 knots, which would have contributed to the creation of a phenomenon known as rogue waves. A rogue wave is categorized as a wave that is unusually higher than the rest. The hypothesis states that the Edmund Fitzgerald was hit by one of these rogue waves, which submerged the ship. This, combined with the high wind speeds and rain, caused the ship to break up. This theory is corroborated by Captain Cooper, who claims that his ship was hit by at least 2 to 3 different rogue waves, both between 30 to 35 feet in height. National Geographic would give their take on this in 2010 from an episode of a little-known series named Dive Detectives. In episode 6, a simulation is run using the size of the waves described by Cooper. A simulation found that one of these waves would have completely submerged the bow of the ship for a short while. Another theory brought by is that the Fitzgerald broke apart on the surface. A former crew member on the Fitzgerald claimed that the ship had a tendency to bend and spring when faced with harsh weather. This theory could be attributed to a modification to the winter load line, which allows heavier loading in exchange for riding lower in the water. However, it seems like the mystery might have been solved after all, or at least we have a good theory as to what happened that night. In October of 2010, YouTuber GL Shipwrecks Society posted a video titled The Lost Fitzgerald Search Tapes. The video featured radio chatter between the Anderson and the Coast Guard on the day the ship went down. In the comment section of the video comes a long comment from a user named Excalibur69, which points out a good hypothesis as to what happened to the ship and the crew that night. He points to a 1994 expedition done by former police officer Frederick J. Shannon. In the post, Excalibur first points out that the wreck resides along the US-Canadian border, with the bow section in the US waters and the stern section in the Canadian waters. At this time, it was known that the ship was going down and an alert was sounded. The Chad burn had read all stop, meaning that all the propellers were cut off. Excalibur points out that this is the first step in abandoning ship. However, the lifeboats were not that useful for the crew anyway. The ship had 2 different lifeboats, both of which were useless. The waves would have been too big for the lifeboats to be launched, whether they were metal or inflatable. The portside pilot house door was locked in the open position, meaning that the crew at some point had left the ship. Making this theory more credible is the crewman that was found outside of the ship, who was wearing suspenders and, most importantly, a cork panel life vest. Evidence also pointed to the Fitzgerald breaking apart on the surface, which would prove the structure failure hypothesis. To this day, the 1994 expedition remains the last manned official trip to the ship. In August of 1976, Canadian folk rock artist Gordon Lightfoot released The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The 6.5-minute country ballad tells the story of the ship and the night that it went down. The inspiration came to him to write the song after he saw a newspaper that had misspelled the name of the ship. The song ended up being really popular for Lightfoot, peaking at the top of the Canadian singles list and at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song has been regarded as a folk rock classic and has gained a cult following of those who are curious about the story of the ill-fated vessel. Captain Bernie Cooper would pass away in 1993, remaining a legend and a hero in the eyes of those who know the tale. The Arthur M. Anderson is still in service to this day, having celebrated its 63rd anniversary this past February. Man, if only things were a little bit different. The story of the Edmund Fitzgerald remains in the public eye to this day, spanning several generations into the future, all who are interested in the story. Several pieces of the Fitzgerald were recovered and are now on display at several museums, one of which is now on display at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum in Detroit, Michigan. The museum features the anchor of the ship that was recovered in the Detroit River. Oh Eddie, where have the times gone? The story has become stuff of legends, with it becoming one of the most haunting maritime stories in Great Lakes history. Who knows if we'll ever know what exactly happened on the ship? With no survivors, we may never know what happened to it, but deep, 230 feet below Lake Superior, is the answer to the mystery behind the ship and the lives that were taken that night. However, what we can do is remember the story and retell it for those who don't know, so the story can remain in the public's eye for a long time. So every year, on November 10th, listen for the 29 chimes of the bell for each man on that ill-fated journey. I'm sure it's what they would have wanted.
The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitchagumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn blue.